I'm glad to get more, like, I guess, people who aren't just our friends from college onto the pod. Just have slightly different, have watched more films or different films than us, which is cool.
Wider
um,
net of people.
yeah. Do you watch any TV, Dominic?
I'm really bad at watching TV. Like, I'm still
Same.
finishing The Last of Us, the
Oh,
first season of that. Like, I have one episode left, and then like The Bear. I'm still like halfway through the second season.
yeah.
And people suggest stuff to me. They'll be like, "Have you seen Breaking Bad?" And I'm like 3 episodes, but then I got stressed out, so I had to stop.
That's honestly, there's a lot of shows that are like that for me because I've seen, I mean, I was primarily a television studies person, and so like I've watched a bunch of like first episodes and memorable episodes from bunch of iconic television shows. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've not watched all of it.
Yeah. Most shows, like, you should just avoid the last season anyway because the writers are kind of not the same and the actors are checked out. So you really only need to watch like 10 good episodes of any show, really, to kind of figure out, like, the X-Files. Like, there's like, I don't know, 200 episodes of that kind of stuff, or Star
Yeah.
Trek: The Next Generation or anything like that. You watch like 10 of them and you're like, I get it, I understand it, it's fun. I love those shows too, but there's so much filler. But
Yeah.
back in the day, the filler, they needed to fill time, so it makes sense.
And then now, like TV shows that are coming out right now, I'm like, they're too short. The seasons are too short. They're cutting them,
Yeah,
and there's not enough. Like
yeah,
we were
there's like
just
eight
saying.
episodes.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just watched House of the Dragon season 2, and it's like it feels like an incomplete season because the producers cut down the episodes, and it's like everyone's all
They did it
mad.
at the very last minute, and then the writer's strike happened.
Mm.
Yeah, it is. I do feel like there are some there are a few TV shows that I'm like the last season is as good if not better, but that's very rare. I can only think of like Angel and Battlestar Galactica are the two TV shows that I've like seen all the way through that I'm like, no, the last season's good. Watch the last season. But of course Battlestar Galactica also had a writer's strike that interrupted that season. So yeah. But you're more of a film person?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I'm in the booth projecting, and the last thing I projected at the theater was Long Legs, which has mixed reviews from a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, I enjoyed it.
I was sick, so I didn't get to go see it, but
Yeah,
I'm like
yeah.
interested by like how mixed I've seen like the comments on it. Do you, because I know like when it's, film and you're projecting it, like how much of it do you actually are you watching while working, or how much, or do you like watch the whole film as part of the process of like preparing to project it?
Yeah, you got that right with that one. It's you show up the day before and hopefully
Mm,
you're not showing it first. I was showing it like third, I think. So I was able to go and watch someone else project it. So I could like look for the cue marks and check the volume personally and like sit there through the whole thing.
mm.
So like I don't get scared accidentally watching it because there's some jump scares and like it's
Oh.
kind of freaky. And then the amount of reels that it came on, I think it was like 5 reels and they're all pretty loaded up. So you can kind of, you don't have to work a million miles an hour on that one. Like some
That's
movies,
good.
they'll come and like the end of it is only like, well, I guess the end would be fine, but like the beginning might be kind of short or just different
Mm,
lengths. So that made it easy. And it's since it's 5 reels, there's only a couple changeovers, and then you're done. But
yeah.
since it's like uh, the aspect ratio was one that I'm not used to working with. I'm used to working with flat and it was in scope. So my framing was off a little and I was like, oh, it looks bad.
Oh.
But people know that we're all volunteers, so they kind of give us a little bit of grace. And I usually let people know beforehand that I'm like, I'm not like the best at this. I can do it and be happy with what you have. And then I run in the booth and start it up. So
Yeah.
it wasn't the worst screening I've had, but I was a little disappointed in myself. I was like, I could do better. I'm sorry. I need more training. I mean, I think I need more training, but it went okay.
we have like the physical curtains that we need to move to get the aspect
Yeah,
ratio
yeah.
right. It's not like
We
you
have to
can
like
flip a
adjust.
switch.
Yeah, we don't have any. And to fix it, there's just a little knob on the projector that just says frame, and you just have to very carefully turn it because the
Mm.
top of the image and the bottom of the image will kind of like shift into place. I was just a little low with everything, so like the top, the bottom 20% of the image ended up on the top of the screen, so you had to just kind of roll it into place, and then it looked
Mm.
fine. And I was like, if I just make the same mistake every time, I know how to fix it. Because if I
That's
overcorrect in the wrong direction, like there's only so much you can move the frame before you like
oh.
snap the film or mess up the film. I mean, I've never had it go that bad, but I don't want to like stop the movie and be like, hold on 5 minutes and start it again. I've done that before, and that's stressful because especially if it's like a sold out show and everyone's like, how long is this going to take? And you're like working as fast as you can to get it right. So,
That I
yeah.
haven't. So I work concessions, and I did do one concession shift when it was long legs, and uh like one of the reels wasn't like like it wasn't rewound, and
Oh,
like
I've heard about that. Yeah.
yeah, so like Greg had to stop the movie and just be
Hmm.
like, I'm sorry, like we got like we all
I
gotta
have to go
wait.
rewind it and then put it on and then thread it and then start it and then hopefully, and yeah, it worked. I mean, that happens sometimes. Just people get busy and
Yeah.
they forget to rewind something. And then you can kind of tell at the end because everything should be like tails out and look good. And you can see the labels. But if there's one where the label's wrong or it looks backwards, you're like, oh, this is, I gotta,
Mm,
I gotta do this. Sorry, everybody.
yeah. But hopefully
I
if
mean, yeah.
people are coming and seeing it on film, then it's like they know.
Yeah, yeah. And it was like a brand new print that showed, I think that was it played in Chicago or somewhere. I think it was Chicago. And then it got shipped to Seattle and they showed it at SIF once at the Egyptian. And then they shipped it
Mm,
to the theater where we volunteer at. And then we pretty much just had a brand new print that we were working with. So it was in really good shape and it wasn't scratched up. But then it's like, don't scratch it up and mess it up because they'll know you did it.
oh, yeah.
And I mean, we wouldn't, you put a deposit down and that stuff's insured. And I'm sure there's, you know, we wouldn't get in too much trouble, but you don't want to be like, oh, we snapped it and we had to like splice it. And I'm
Yeah.
sure like it gives it character and people think that's cool. But the people that own the print are like, oh, you guys are the
Yeah.
ones that mess up our film.
Yeah.
The place where you work, Fabiola, you is it do you guys just do digital screenings, or is there ever do you have film projection as well?
We definitely have projection in classrooms.
Okay. That's cool. You've also gotten to edit and work with actual film, right?
Yeah. I prefer silent film reel editing to like modern editing. Something about silent film editing is just really relaxing,
Mm.
which is the complete opposite experience on
Yeah.
Premiere Pro.
Yeah, you and Premiere Pro have an antagonistic relationship. It never it never wants to work for you. Um that's honestly, you know what? Some people, I've heard people like talk about how like, oh, working with film is like pretentious, or like it's, all these chemicals, it's so bad for the environment. Why would you want to work with film? And it's like, yeah, there's those complications, but also some people are that's the that's what the kind of film editing that works for their brain. um well, um
Speaking of film,
speaking of film, what are we talking about today?
so today we're talking about Evil Dead 2. We're jumping right into the second one.
And we have our first guest of the season. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Dominic. Yeah, and I'm a projectionist at the Grand Illusion. I've been there for like 5 years. It's Grand Illusion Cinema in Seattle. It's everyone's a volunteer. I'm a volunteer. I started there back in like summer 2019. And then there was
Oh,
that little spell where we were like closed for a minute,
yeah.
as everyone remembers. But then we started back up in like May of 2021. But I've been a projectionist pretty much since I started there, which is not the norm. Like
Yeah.
you're supposed to start as a concessionaire and then become a projectionist, but I got kind of fast tracked, I think accidentally, and I acknowledge that and I recognize that, but here I am. I can't change what happened. So
I'm I have now a question out of curiosity. Were you a projectionist before you started volunteering?
no, no, I was not. I was doing like backyard stuff, and one of my friends who used to volunteer there, they were there on Tuesday nights as a concessionaire, and they're like, "You should volunteer at the theater. It's really fun and rewarding." And I was like, "I'm not gonna do that. I don't have time." And they were like, "No, no, I really think you should." And I was like, I'll think about it. And then they said, "Oh, you get free video rentals if you volunteer there." And I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Like that's, and how long?" And they were like, "Oh, you're only there for like once a month for like an hour." And I was like, "Oh, I could do that." And then yeah, it pays for itself. And now I'm there like 3 times a week. I feel like I'm there all the time, and I'm a projectionist instead of just like, "Oh, you're concession." And back when I started the concessionaire, it was a little more hands-on because we were tearing tickets and all was cash sales.
Oh.
So you're touching money and touching the tickets, and you have to handwrite everything, and you know, it
Oof.
was a lot more sticky
Yeah.
than it is now. Now there's like a tablet and people don't have to pay with cash. And I mean, it's still, there's labor involved, but it
Yeah.
was, and I was a Sunday person. So I was there by myself. So you'd
Oh.
run the counter and then run the projector. And I was there on Halloween right after we restarted everything. And I was there by myself and it was like Halloween and it was super busy. And
I
I was like,
bet.
and I told the manager, I'm not going to name him because I don't want to get in trouble because he's still kind of the manager. I was like, can I please, can we have, we're all volunteers. And I know there's a list of people that want to volunteer. Can we just get a Sunday person so I'm not alone? And he's like, yeah, yeah, we'll get you a Sunday person. So that changed. So yeah, I've been there for a while and it's fun. It's rewarding and it's nice to be a projectionist and work in digital, work with the physical media, the film itself. And I'm there on Sundays for matinee shows, which are masked shows. So
Yeah.
if people are being COVID conscious, they can go to those shows because we still do some of those. I know Northwest Film Forum, I think they're all masked shows there. And we
Yeah.
kind of have a hybrid program just because we have more showings on the weekends. So on the weekends before 6 o'clock, people can like watch a movie and feel comfortable and know that, oh, I can watch that and there's going to be multiple screenings of stuff. Like we try not to do single shows in that block. We try to make sure that the programming is spread out and people that want to see what we're showing can show up and see it and not be
Yeah.
like, well, I missed the one screening. That's too bad. Like we'll try to have a few at
Yeah.
least so people can participate in the community. Yeah.
Yeah. And we are really happy to have you on to talk about Evil Dead.
Yes, it's
Uh,
exciting.
Two.
we, yeah, Evil Dead 2,
Yeah,
Second
dose.
one.
Yes.
which both of us hadn't seen before this episode recording. I mean, like, we're watched it now for the episode recording,
Yeah.
but like, it was our first
Oh,
time watching it for the podcast.
wow.
Um,
Did you
and
both, is it the first time watching the first one too? Or have you just only seen the second one?
Just only seen the second.
You've
and
only seen the second one.
Yeah.
I watched the first Evil Dead last night and I watched Evil Dead 2 today. So, but it was
For the
again
first
my
time.
first time for the any of the
Wow.
franchise.
Wow.
So, I'm really glad that we have someone who has have you seen the all of the films?
I
Um
watched them. So if we're gonna get into it, I watched the third one when I was like 5. And I didn't even know
oh.
that the other ones existed because I remember seeing advertisements in my brother's comic books and like you'd be reading like a Terminator comic and then you'd see, oh, there's a movie called Army of Darkness and like the splash in it. It's like this big picture of like it's like a Frank Frazetta painting, but it's
Mm,
Bruce Campbell and then there's, a wench on his leg or whatever who's the lead actress in it. I forget her name. She was in Matilda. She was the teacher in Matilda. She's in that movie.
Is Honey?
Yeah, she's
oh.
like the princess that he has to save in that movie. So I remember seeing that first, and it's just like an action movie with like skeletons and it's goofy. And then later in life, I think I was like a teenager, I saw Evil Dead 2, and then that same summer I saw Evil Dead 1. So I saw those, oh, geez, almost 20 years ago when I actually saw those two.
Yeah.
And I remember not liking Evil Dead 1 that much and liking Evil Dead 2 more. And then I watched them all again recently and like the orders totally flipped where I liked Evil Dead 1 the most. And then Evil Dead 2, I was like, okay, it's fun. And then Army of Darkness, I'm like, I have nostalgia for it. It's goofy, but I'm not like, I love that movie. It's like, eh, it's got its moments. It's fun. But I'm not
Yeah.
like, hell yeah, Army of Darkness. It's like, Army of Darkness, all right, cool. I'll watch it.
And I mean, Fabiola, you were like, "Oh, I want us to discuss Evil Dead 2 for the podcast." I can absolutely see why, and I'm like excited to kind of talk about the camp aspects of this film, but I'm curious why you picked it for the pod.
And I think it's like this one and Army of Darkness are both recognized as like the more camp and goofy ones of the series. And I feel like we should also like cover a Sam Raimi movie since his style is like really distinct and like you can tell when he made something. You can tell like what film is a Sam Raimi film.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Evil Dead 2 is like the one I hear the most about in terms of the whole series.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And I
He's, yeah.
Evil Dead 2 is also interesting, and then it's like this weird in between of like it's horror, but it's also comedy and action, and it's like I feel like it's the like kind of fluidity of its genre is an aspect of the camp to me where it's kind of hard to pin down like what exactly you're supposed to feel when certain scenes are happening because it's like, oh, this is funny slapstick, but also it's really gory at the same time. I really know pretty little about Sam Raimi. I know that he's a very distinct, like, has a distinct directorial style. I know he did the Spider-Mans. Um, and The Evil Dead was his first film, right? Like
I
his
think
first
so.
feature. Um, so do either of you know behind the scenes information? I know Fabiola, you were maybe gonna do some research.
Yeah, so my like research slash supplemental material is an article in horrorhomeroom.com written by Guy Webster, who's a PhD in like mainly early 20th century modernism.
Oh.
And I think his article is really good and is kind of a good starting off point. It's mainly starts with the first Evil Dead since it was written for its 40th anniversary, but it kind of covers like the whole original series, like conceptually and also in relation to more modern horror.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it did it like establish or like the kind of modern cabin in the woods kind of horror genre.
Kind of, but his article is mainly comparing it to like the current quote elevated horror stuff.
Oh, interesting.
I can read like a bunch of paragraphs
Yeah,
from
what
it.
read your some favorite
So
quotes.
the like background section that he covers is 40 years ago, Detroit's Redford Theater hosted the premiere of The Book of the Dead, a new film by Sam Raimi, a fan of the extravagant premieres popularized by William Castle. Raimi put on a show. Custom made ticket stubs promised the ultimate experience in grueling terror, and two ambulances were ceremoniously parked outside. If that were not enough, two wind tracks were set up to transport attendees to the film's iconic setting, a dilapidated cabin in the woods. 2 years later, and the film, renamed The Evil Dead, would make over 29 million worldwide, due in no small part to its dedication on and off screen to the kind of theatrical spectacle initially created in the Redford Theater.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was very grassroots
Yeah.
stuff.
I mean, I watched the first one last night and it was like from the opening shot, I was like, oh yeah, this is indie. Like, there's a feel to, I'm like, I can tell that someone is running around the woods carrying this camera. I mean, it was also, early 80s. It's not like, they had drones and stuff, but,
Yeah. It very
and
much adds to the charm of it and how physical these films are, because you really do feel like you're running in the woods, and like there very much is a weight to the camera in this film.
yeah. And Bruce Campbell, who plays Ash, is like a childhood friend of Sam Raimi, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I watched. I wasn't able to watch the video for Evil Dead 2, but I watched the Dead Meat kill count for the Evil Dead, and I think they mentioned how they're like it was a basically a team of family and friends for that first movie. Yeah. Um there's also something very like, I mean, we've covered some 80s horror on this podcast before. Mainly I think of like Elvira. And we've talked about how there's there's a certain like there's a certain tactileness
They
to,
love their weird puppets.
yeah, to puppets and like practical special effects, makeup, and like stop motion animation, that everything just feels very like, I I don't, it's a style that I think that emerges from like limitations in production that I honestly adore the look of, because it feels like it feels real in a way that CGI or like stuff shot on the volume, can't feel.
Also adds to the uncanniness and like the general weird vibe that like the spirits are trying to convey as
Yeah.
well, that wouldn't necessarily work with more modern technology.
I just realized we should probably give a plot summary of what this movie is about. Dominic, would you like to give kind of a rundown of the events of Evil Dead 2?
Yeah. So I think before that though, Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 kind of bleed into each other, and they
Yeah.
lost the rights to Evil Dead 1 because they just wanted to do a recap at the beginning of Evil Dead 2 to be like last time on Evil Dead for the sequel, but they couldn't. So they kind of had to really do like a shortened version of the first movie just to kind of like get back up to speed to start the movie up. And I saw an interview with Bruce Campbell where it was on a making of Evil Dead 2
Mm.
documentary. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, where he says if you watch Evil Dead 1 up until the very end scene, which, spoiler, the camera zooms at his face, and then you pick it up at the next time that happens at the very beginning of Evil Dead 2, that's like the complete portion of it. So the first 7 minutes of the movie, Evil Dead 2, you don't really have to watch. So if you're just going to start with Evil Dead 2, which I will, if you want to skip that first part, it's Ash and his girlfriend Linda go to a cabin in the woods for some seclusion, and I think it's a family friend of theirs, and there is a tape recorder in the cabin, and they say, oh, there's a tape recorder, I wonder what's on it, and they hit play, and it's a professor reading an ancient incantation out of an evil book that raises demons from ancient times, and they can possess people. And i I could go more into it, but I don't want to spoil too much. I don't know.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
like that
This
happens, the
is a
demons
very
show up.
spoilery
Oh, okay.
podcast.
Well, the demons
Yeah.
jump in, and Ash has to start taking out people because the demons just jump into everybody, including himself. And after it attacks his girlfriend, it attacks him because he's the only person around for it to attack. And he iconically has to, take off his own hand in a crazy moment. First, he fights his hand, which is insane.
yeah.
Like it's like he's doing like all this like rodeo clown work in this movie, like breaking plates over his head and punching himself in the face and like smashing his head on the counter. And then more people show up to the cabin. It's the, I believe it's the niece of the professor. She's shows up
Or
with
the
her
daughter, I
daughter. Yeah,
think.
it's his
Yeah.
daughter. His daughter shows
Yeah.
up with the pages from the book that, oh, they found him in the temple from the last, so they can keep the story going. Like, oh, we found more pages from the book. So now they're adding that. And then her boyfriend's there. And then they meet up with some local people because the bridge to the cabin is out and they need to get guided there. And that's well, there's Annie is the daughter,
Yeah.
and Ed is her boyfriend. And then they run into Jake, who is the tow truck driver who's missing teeth. And his personality is that he is a hillbilly, I guess. And then his girlfriend, Bobby Joe, whose personality is chewing tobacco and being mean
Yeah.
and spitting at people's feet. And then they all go to the cabin. And then they run into Ash, who's covered in blood, freaking out with a stump where his hand used to be, and everything in the cabin is destroyed. And yeah, it just keeps going from there. And then Annie's mom turns out is a demon in the cellar, played by Sam Raimi's brother Ted, wearing this disgusting, rotting suit
Yeah.
that is, just totally nasty and gross and full of maggots. And yeah, talk about camp. That's like the campiest character in the whole movie, I feel. Like that's the performance. And you think camp is like, okay, Bruce Campbell
It's
doing
it's
his,
her and the dancing dead
oh
body
yes,
girlfriend.
Linda's body.
Yeah.
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 And yeah, that just,
It,
then it's
it,
Ash versus the demons. So yeah.
it's basically, what was your letterbox review, Fabiola? Man going insane at Universal Horror Nights.
The specific review is more movies should be about someone having a manic episode at Universal Halloween Horror Nights.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. It's
um
definitely a guy fighting a bunch of like foam rubber props and body parts and beating them up with a rubber mallet axe.
yeah, and it's it's interesting, especially watching the where I watched The Evil Dead last night, and he's like a relatively stoic character in that movie. Um, Meanwhile, in the Evil Dead 2, he's completely manic and just like laughing, covered in blood. He's a badass and gets, a chainsaw arm, and it says cool one-liners when he's like, killing
He says
these.
groovy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he says groovy after killing like his best friend and his girlfriend and his sister and these strangers. Like he's killing all these people. He's mutilated, and then he's like groovy. Like it's
Yeah.
so absurd. It's insane. Like he's totally insane.
And one of the things, this kind of theme that's emerged from this season, or rather that we want to explore this season of camp pod, is the kind of cruelty in camp. And I'm like, oh, this film really works, because it's like you said, this guy who's like gone through just the worst 24 hours of his life, pretty
He's
much.
experiencing the horrors, and it's so much fun to watch.
Yeah. It's like he's going through it, and it's like, this is so fun. This is so funny. He's having to chop off his own hand, but his own hand is like this little creature who's like
But
making
like it
little
started
animal
with
noises.
his girlfriend's head biting his hand, and he's just like flailing around the head and smashing it and like hitting it all over the cabin. And then his head gets infected, which
Yeah.
then is like him fighting his own hand until he has to chop it off.
Yeah.
And like
But then it
this,
keeps going.
yeah, just get like her body attacks him, and also just like the rules in general with this movie are always changing. Like sometimes the demon just jumps in you, sometimes you gotta get bit, sometimes the sunlight makes it go away. It's like it doesn't Like if they don't want a demon in a scene, they just go, oh, they'll just go away and we can like go back to normal. Like the rules in it are so loose that it's like, yeah, it's just a movie. You're having fun. Like they kind of expect you to like not care about plot holes and weird stuff like that. They just say, oh, well, it's a movie, it's a horror movie, and there's gonna be a lot of blood, so have fun.
Some parts of it reminded me of like the old surrealist movies that like Dada made and the early Luis Borges movies where you have no idea what's gonna happen next. Like sometimes it's like things in the cabin that are possessed. Sometimes like at one point the whole surrounding area of the cabin disappears. So like there's no rules as to how the supernatural works. It's something's gonna happen and you don't know what it is.
Yeah. I also was gonna say there's something to kind of like the artificiality of this like this weird bizarro world that it's like this can only happen if it's a movie, and it feels like a movie to a certain extent, is how is I think the one dimensionality of all the characters, um and an aspect of camp is like talking about instant character, um and when you were giving the plot summary, Dominic, of just being like each of these like people who show up the cabin, they have one note about them and that's their
Yeah.
note. And that's kind of like that's all you need for a horror movie. It's like you need to know one thing about this person for them to understand that they're a person before seeing them get just fucked up by the environment that they're
Yes.
in.
The challenge comes and then they all meet it in a different way. Like with Ed, he's the boyfriend and he's very like broad-shouldered, tall, macho, and he's with Annie and he just turns into a demon because like he barely has any character at all. And with Jake, the tow truck driver, he is kind of mean and kind of dumb. And as soon as he gets his hands on the gun, he's like, I'm in charge now. And that's just what he does. Because you're like, oh, yeah, of course he would grab the gun and make really bad decisions and start bossing people around, even though he has no idea what's happening. Because, like, they introduce him as the idiot tow truck driver. And that's just kind of, and of course, Annie, who is like the Girl Scout of the group, who shows up and I have the book and I'm gonna go get it and I have a sweater tied around my shoulders. Like
Yeah.
they're just, yeah, one-dimensional characters, but they do the thing they're supposed to do in the movie. Like no one's being, the unpredictability of it is like the demons just kind of showing up and moving they just move the whole movie forward. Like, oh, there's a demon and they killed somebody, they chopped something up, they caused havoc, and now they have to like fix it, and then it just keeps happening and whittling characters down. And it's I could see a critic watching it and being like, oh God, like if you're not game for it, you'd be like, why am I even watching this? But if you're game for it, like you're gonna love it. Because especially with the first one, it's even more brutal and less
Yeah.
like fun. It's just like watch these college students just get tortured to death and then everybody's dead and it's bad. Whereas this one, it's almost like Ash watched the first movie with us and now he's like, now I know how to do it. And now he's like going through the ride with you in a way. And you can kind of root for him more, which in most horror movies, you're rooting for the monsters, but in this one, you're actually more rooting for the protagonist. And the protagonist is also a guy, which is different. It's like in all the Friday the 13th and Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, it's usually a final girl. But with this one, they're like, here's this guy that looks like a G.I. Joe. And you're like, yeah, do it.
Well, I also I read a review of the first movie that I thought was a brought up a good point. It's was by Darren Mooney on Letterboxd, of pointing out the fact that like he's this like Ash is in a sense playing the final girl role, and he is this kind of like, tough, cool action guy. But there's this like I feel like it's more so in just the Evil Dead, the first one, of they Ash is short for Ashley, which is
Mhm.
this feminine
Yeah.
name, and he is called Ashley by his like sisters and friends in the first movie. They're like, oh, because also in the first movie, it's not just the girlfriend Linda; it's also his sister and two other friends. Um, and I just like it is kind of interesting, like Ash as this character is not exactly like it's another thing that's camp about at him, where it's kind of hard to fit him in a like standard trope box, because it's like, okay, he's this action hero, but he also doesn't really want to be, and he's also like just a weirdo too, and is like laughing at all these things that are happening to him, and is kind of like has this like almost like painting of like femininity onto him, not maybe necessarily in his behavior, but with the name Ashley and the meta context of like him being this final girl in terms of how horror movies usually work.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into the section of the article where it talks about various reviews of the Evil Dead series, and like in relation to Susan Sontag saying the camp is an assertion that good taste is not simply good taste, but that there exists indeed a good taste of bad taste. And like
Mm.
first he brings up Roger Ebert's review of Evil Dead 2, and he describes it as it is not in bad taste according to Ebert, but rather about bad taste. And then after seeing the original film, Clive James offered a similar, albeit harsher review, describing it as a horror movie too stupid to horrify. Stupidity, bad taste, these are composite elements of a camp aesthetic that remain central to the Evil Dead franchise and its influence. In 1981, viewers encountered the film's starkly humorous violence, its bucket loads of blood, and the theatrical excess of Bruce Campbell's performance in a way that positioned them somewhere between awestruck terror and fits of laughter. It is telling that the film concludes by cutting suddenly from a horrified scream to the jarringly bouncy jazz tradition Charleston. Such an effective tension key to the stylism of the film and its affinity to camp horror. And this one ends with Ash getting sucked into a vortex, which lands him in medieval Europe with his chainsaw hand
And
and
shotgun.
gun, and then all these knights are like hailing him as this hero, and he's just screaming.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
he's repeating no. He's going, no, I don't know
Yeah.
why. So yeah, he doesn't want to be a hero. He's like, I don't want to do this.
it's the image too of just like him with a chainsaw and shotgun surrounded by a bunch of like medieval knights is like that clash of imagery is also really like fun to me. I'm sure that's I haven't seen
And
Army of
they were also
Darkness.
trying to fight this like demon that's kind of a like flesh colored dragon with a human head, and Ash just shoots its head off.
Yeah.
It's very much like a like an 8-year-old boy's like fantasy drawing. It's like, what's that? That's me. What are you doing? Fighting a dragon with what? A chainsaw and a shotgun, and there's knights ever. It's Sam Raimi is definitely like a little kid just playing with action figures with these movies. He's like, and then there's a dinosaur, and then there's a skeleton, and he's just like throwing all of his toys together. Is how he's writing this. It's what it feels like, and it's very unserious. It's like I mean, it's not supposed to be realistic, but it's like if anybody was like, "Hey, that doesn't make sense," he'd be like, "I don't care. I'm making this movie," and you're like, "Okay, that's fun."
Yeah, that's the thing that's about this movie, that it it works because I think it knows what it is. It's just having fun, and it's like, so I'm not really, it's like I can't be bothered with plot holes because it's not,
It's not about that.
yeah, it's
It's
like
not its goal.
it's,
No,
you're not supposed to take it seriously, and it knows that it, like, not to take it seriously too. It as like, this, the production of the film, and everyone involved. Um,
It's very much focused in how much we can run around with this camera and how many of these shots are like the coolest thing you'll ever see. That's what this film is about.
Hail he who has come from the skies to deliver us from the terrors of the Deadites! Hail! 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 No! Hail! No! Hail! No!
in some ways, it's very like, I mean, it's classic dark humor in the sense of like, people have died and it doesn't care. It's like, oh, let's, there is a corpse and it's gonna dance around and spin a head around, and just like, there's very little like respect for human life of these characters.
The severed hand gives Ash the finger.
Yeah. It's also very Gremlins 2 in that sense too, where it's like,
Yeah.
you're like, hey, this is ridiculous, and it's like, I don't care, middle finger.
yeah, it's like these demons are ancient evil, but they also have TVs in hell, and they know what's funny, and they know what we know is funny. So they're like, "This is a joke. I understand." Like the Henrietta, like I'm sure when they possess people, they get their memories. But yeah, Henrietta walking towards Ash in the basement, saying, "Come to Henrietta," kind of seductively and being like, yucky. Like, all right, that's some demon stuff. That's pretty nasty. But it's also like these demons, they've watched TV. They know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and there's a disrespect that these demons have for like the care, like the loved ones, and like the people who are still surviving,
Oh
like
yeah, they'll like
the,
swap back and forth. They'll change back and say, "Let me out. I'm in the basement." This like when her mom comes back and says
yeah,
she's singing "Hush Little Baby" to her, and then they're
yeah.
singing it to each other, and then they look back and it's this cackling monster at the cellar door, and they're and then with his girlfriend in the vice, he finally gets the hand free of the bite of this rabid monster, and then she's crying and saying, "Don't chop me up with the chainsaw," when her head's in a vice, and he's crying and he doesn't know what to do, and then it's spitting blood at him. It's a total nightmare. So the demons, yeah, they know what they're doing, and they're definitely just
They
playing
love
with
to play
yeah,
tricks.
they're playing with their food and they're just having fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, all the possessed trees for some reason reminded me of like Snow White and Wizard of Oz.
Oh yeah.
Oh. I made a list when I was taking notes for this film of all of the like animated objects, all the things that come alive.
Oh yeah.
Um cuz there's just so much that, like, it it's just like the whole world, the whole environment, and everything in it is just in on the fun in some ways. Um, where like in the Evil Dead, the first one, it feels like everything's in on making, like, it's very hostile and very like, it's gonna
Mhm.
attack you. The woods like hate them and are going to destroy them. And then in this movie, it's like, yeah, everything's destroying you, but it's having a laugh while it does it. um so here's my little list. The house, the cabin itself, kind of looks like a skull. And the destroyed bridge also looks like a claw. Um, the piano, like one of the first indications that's like, okay, is Ash just losing his mind? Is like the piano like starts playing itself, the rocking chair moves on its own. The mirror, like Ash's reflection from the mirror, like comes out and
Yeah.
talks to him. Of course, the hand, once it's like it sort of has a life of its own and it's like squeaking like a little animal. And then the whole house, like there's like the deer head on the wall, like gets the like deadite, like possessed eyes,
The
and
little
is
desk lamp.
the desk lamp, and then like all of the pictures are swinging on the walls, and it's like they're
And then
laughing.
Ash is laughing with them.
Yeah.
And him and the lamp do a little dance together.
Yeah.
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 They do a little up down with their knees. Yeah.
And then I also think that there's something about like the camera and the way that moves that feels like it has a life of its own. And then, like in some ways it's like it is the demons, like it is the evil spirits as it like flies around.
It's the POV.
Yeah. And so I think that's also like I'm trying to think of, I can't think of other films, at least other films in the horror genre, that like do that, where it like it like almost personifies the aspects of the way the film is constructed. It's like the camera and the way this movie is shot it's a character. And not just in
It
like
also-
someone says like, the setting is a character because it feels like it plays a strong part of the plot, where it's like, no, there is like characterization to the camera.
Yeah, and like the way this film is shot also just really highlights the fact that this is a film, therefore all of this is fake, which lends to the camp, which I feel like a lot of horror is about, like making you suspend as much disbelief and making you feel like everything is real. Meanwhile, this one is kind of all about making you aware about how all this is not real and you're just there to have fun and to not take anything in this movie too seriously.
And to go back to the camera, I mean, the closest example I can think of for a movie or for movies that would do some POV stuff like that, there's some of that in Halloween, which was, I
Oh,
think, just
yeah.
the year before, but it was slow and plodding, and it just felt like a cameraman. I mean, yeah, he puts the mask on and there's eye holes for certain scenes. And there's a few scenes where you're in the perspective of the killer, but it happens more frequently in Evil Dead, and it's so much faster, and it's definitely more unrealistic than, oh, there's just a stalker, a serial killer. It's a demon, and the camera can like fly through the car and bust out the windshield and bust through doors and is knocking things over and is twisting and turning, and it has more character, which is why I think it's probably more iconic. And people go, oh, they're doing, like, if you see a shot like that in a movie now, you'll go, oh, they're doing an Evil Dead thing with the camera making it move so fast. Whereas with like POV shots of stalkers and serial killers and horror movies, you go, oh yeah, they're doing like the breathing thing and the heartbeat thing. And if you're not really paying attention, you're not even thinking that it's the killer's like point of view, because you just think, oh, they're just doing that thing they do in horror movies. That's kind of just, it just happens now. But with that, it's like, oh yeah, I can tell they're really jumping and running around and being way crazier with it and way more fantastical and fantasy based. And I'm sure there's like fantasy movies where it's like the point of view of like a dragon flying through the air or something. I haven't seen one like that, but I'm sure there are movies that do that with like a monster that's big
Yeah.
that does stuff like that. But it was probably one of the first times that they did that, where it was like a roller coaster ride for the audience to sit in the theater and watch the camera move that quickly and to chase people and to be that action oriented part of the movie.
Roller coaster ride is a really good way to describe this movie.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me a bit of those few shots and challengers where you are the ball.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I know that there are lots of like kind of like comedy horror is absolutely a genre now, but where does this like movie sit in terms of like, I don't really know where this sits in terms of like the evolution of horror movies, and like were was this kind of the first of its kind where it's really like a horror comedy that is, you know, that is having fun, and you're not supposed to take it too seriously, like um or like what how does how is like, was there specific reactions to like the Evil Dead 2 and like responses to it, like were there other movies that were like it after it came out?
I think this was definitely like at the beginning of the horror comedy era, but this horror comedy doesn't really work like most horror comedies do, where they're usually like they're very consciously making jokes or making like references to other movies
Mm,
or like self-aware in some ways. Meanwhile, the comedy in this film comes from how like crazy everything looks, which is not the case in most horror comedies.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's horror comedies that were like Ghostbusters, for example, a family film, and
Mm,
that came out, I think, a little bit before that, and it's for kids essentially. But with Evil Dead, they're like, instead of having slime, let's have like a shit ton of blood, and
yeah.
then the ratings board goes, oh, that's too much blood, you know. But with Ghostbusters, they're like, you know, making wisecracks and they're having fun, and it's a family adventure movie almost. And then, I mean, generations before that in films, there was stuff like Laurel and Hardy meet the
Mm.
Wolfman or the Mummy or whatever, but those were just like slapstick and why I oughta fist shaking kind of movies that they're kind of doing in Evil Dead with like the Three Stooges-y stuff that they do. But as far as like the gore fest plus the comedy, I was probably one of the first movies to kind of do something like that. And then
Yeah.
after that, I'm trying to think of movies that went crazy. Like, I mean, there's movies that were like meta, like Scream, that were really
Yeah.
bloody and had rules and were very horror film fanatical, you know, fans of it, but not. I'd have to think for a minute. It's like, oh, is there something that's like kind of like Evil Dead 2 besides the sequel?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is. That's a good point where it's like, it's not there. There aren't jokes in the sense like characters aren't making quips. Characters are
No,
screaming and crying. It's all. It's. I guess it's very.
it's like Popeye with blood.
Yeah. It's the action and
Yeah,
the like the.
it's like a cartoon. Yeah,
Yeah.
but with bad words and way too much blood.
Yeah, I'm really, it really, I guess there really is like nothing kind of quite like it, which is probably why it gets talked about so much.
Yeah, and like part of what makes it so unique and also camp is how it seems the characters aren't super aware of what kind of film there is.
Mm,
They're like reacting like horror leads and from this era, but like just the comedy from like comes from the genre awareness of the audience rather than from the characters themselves like talking about horror or like this other horror movie or like their roles in the film in a meta sense.
Yeah. Yeah, like I love Scream, but it's a very different
Yeah.
movie than Scream.
Yeah, and like in those movies, the rules are don't run up the stairs, find the car keys, find the gun. But in this, it's like none of that stuff works. It's really just like try to survive till the sun rises and hopefully it makes them go away, maybe.
Yeah.
Or read the spell and maybe a portal will open. Who knows? The demons can do whatever they want in this movie. So you just have to kind of like see how it goes. And they can't really change, like, oh, we subverted your expectations of the movie because there's a twist. Like, there's no space for a twist. The whole thing's twisting the whole time.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not like you can't there's not going to be like one moment where you're surprised because it's like you can't set expectations when watching this movie because it's going to constantly be moving and stuff is constantly going to be happening and arms or hands and, creatures from the depths or could jump out at any time.
Every 5 seconds I was like, something's gonna jump out.
And it usually did.
Yeah. And
Like when Ed gets possessed, it just comes out of nowhere.
yeah.
They're just
Yeah.
talking and then suddenly he jumps up and is screaming. Or when Ash gets possessed, you're like, oh, he's
Yeah.
possessed. They just jump up screaming into the frame and the chase is on.
Yeah, I was like looking at my phone, taking notes, and then I was like, wait, hold on. Wait, Ash is possessed now. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Another section of the article that I really liked says, for camp, stylism is significant in and of itself. There is a joyful, often excessive aestheticism to camp that in Sam Raimi's original and also Evil Dead 2 makes you aware, even in awe, of his technical skill. In the face of giggling, melting, or insulting deadite, the viewer finds the response, whether fear or wary chuckle, inseparable from the fake blood and carrot syrup, stop motion claymation, or Dutch angle camera sweeping through the woods. In other words, our response leads to an encounter with the language of cinema itself, rather than to any allegorized reality. So yeah, that kind of relates to how in the comedy aspect of this film is mainly about conveyed through the language of cinema rather than like comments that the characters themselves make, like in
Yeah.
most other horror comedies.
I mean, the thing, like, I'm trying to think of the closest example I can think of a filmmaker who is like using the language of cinema for comedy, but it's just comedy, is like Edgar Wright. Which, but even then, it's such a like he has a style to the way his films are edited, and there is also a lot of dialogue to those movies too that make it the comedy. Yeah, where this it's I guess if I'm trying to like piece one aspect of like, I mean, it's all of the aspects of production, but if there's one aspect of like the language of film that I feel like that is used for the most is like the cinematography. It's like the way the camera moves through this movie is what makes the tone, which is like really cool. That's like just like I feel like that's not something that when people
It's incredibly hard to do.
yeah, and especially for horror. Like I'm like, gosh, like it's a really like I feel like to me as someone who's interested in making horror movies, it's really inspiring to be like, oh, like how much you can use your camera to to make the movie. Like, obviously, because it's not gonna be a movie without there's like a, a camera. It's a moving picture, but
Yeah, I think Sam Raimi's personality, because a lot of the shots, especially again the demon running through the woods, like that's him with the camera when that's happening. So that's his personality, and he was a very hands-on director when they made this movie. So he was definitely like in the room doing it, and he was in charge. And he's like another actor in it in that way, and he really shows that he is the one holding the camera and he's directing it. And yeah, as far as like the cinematography, just like other shots though, it just feels again like you're watching Looney Tunes, the way that the camera moves and pans and moves really quickly. It feels like you're watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon, like you're watching Hair Raising Hair or something, because
yeah.
it's so cartoony and physical. And especially scenes where Ash is by himself and he's not talking, so it's just him interacting with the house and grunting and screaming. It's just he's walking into rakes the whole time.
I feel like there's is there multiple moments, or is it just kind of when he's like laughing alongside the house where there's like it's really up and close with his face.
Yeah, that happens a few
Oh, it
times, I
happens
think.
so many
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, another like horror comedy comparison that I was gonna make is Buster Keaton,
Oh yeah.
because all
Oh.
of his work is about, especially like his early work is about, like it's supposed to be funny, but he was actively putting his life in danger to make you laugh. Like I immediately think of the house falling down and he's like at the door. Like that could have very easily killed him,
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
but they're just filming him.
yeah.
And he's also like on moving trains and everything.
Oh yeah, when he throws the railroad tie to like switch the tracks over,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Buster Keaton's actually a really good comparison because yeah, I mean, he was doing those stunts without like I think there is one that's like
Zero regulation.
yeah, there's like I know that there's like I think there's he did some stunts where he's like running and like hopping between roofs and stuff. I think that was a Buster
Parkour.
Keaton thing. Yeah, and it was like there weren't safety nets, It's like he could have fallen. And
They
That's
actually did
entertainment.
drop the house on him.
yeah. Yeah, and it was like
What?
yeah. Yeah, that is honestly like iconic shots, cinema shots where it's like no, you're literally like what you are seeing is exactly what happened. The house front literally did just fall on right around him like that.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, like yeah, that footage is like just scary to watch, knowing that all of that is real with zero regulation, zero safety. But the goal of that footage is to make you laugh. And like it's that push and pull that like this film is really operating on.
You bastards! You dirty bastard! Give me back my head! Give me back my head!
Do you guys have like like specific moment or anything that is like your favorite that like or something that like really stands out to you when you think of this movie, especially Dominic as someone who's seen it multiple times?
I think the scene where he chops his own hand off, because they don't show him chopping his hand. He stabs his hand, and it's like, oh, it's kind of a jump when that happens because the hand is crawling towards a meat cleaver, and he's unconscious, but then he wakes back up and stabs his own hand. So just you see a hand getting stabbed, and then I think the one liner is like, "Who's laughing now?" I think is what he says
Yeah.
before he chops his hand off, and they don't show the chainsaw. He's like screaming and laughing, and blood is just shooting in his face with someone just shooting a garden hose of, you know, paint and syrup into his face. And just that shot of him screaming and chopping his own hand off, like if someone was like, what's a snapshot of the movie that you would show somebody as like a thumbnail, like that's what I'd show them, is just his face just covered in blood, screaming and laughing, chopping his own hand off. Like that's the shot of the movie,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
To me, it's the headless girlfriend running in with the chainsaw.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
And just beating him like a mallet.
Yeah, I also really liked the headless girlfriend doing the dance, like this mocking like version of what she was when she was alive, you know.
Yeah, because he was playing piano earlier and she's kind of dancing in the room when he was playing piano. And then that song plays again, but it's her corpse. And she's doing that twirl that she did, but her head is facing him still. So the body's moving, but the head's staying, like looking at him. And then she just kind of leaps into the shadows and goes, ah, and like just disappears into the smoke.
Yeah.
I also love the deer head.
The deer head. That was
Mhm.
honestly probably the moment where it was like, even though it's so weird and so funny, it's like the effects of the deer head I think were the creepiest moment actually to me for the show. Also just because it's so like, or show, the movie. It's like it's also just that weird uncanniness of like, obviously it's corpses that are coming alive, but it's like this was a deer head that had been on the wall, and it's suddenly like you have to confront the fact that that was something that was once alive that is now like, that you would think would just be decoration in the home, but then it's like, oh, that was a living thing, and now I'm like confronted with like the death and the like macabre. Yeah.
Also, the way it moves, it's so puppety.
Yeah.
Just like the movement alone of how all the possessed things in this film move. Like
Yeah.
that alone is just kind of incredible to watch.
Yeah, I also think that there's something about like, it's puppets, and it's like it's not like you're trying to, it's because the situation is so bizarre. It's not like some puppetry, you know, if like in high, you know, high fantasy stuff where it's like you're supposed to believe that this is an actual creature and it's like part of the world. It's like, no, no, it's a puppet. And it's okay that you can recognize that it's a puppet.
It just adds to how insane the situation in the film is. Like it would not be as effective if it was more polished.
Yeah, like if it came out, I
Mhm.
mean, I haven't seen the remakes, and I'm because there were a few remakes that came out, but I'm sure that they're not going to have people with like really bad plaster makeup on, or a foam suit that's torn up the back because they split it accidentally, like with the Henrietta costume. Like you can tell it's kind of falling apart in certain scenes. And I mean, I'm sure there's other things that are scary and campy about the last few remakes and the reboot stuff that they've done in the last few years. I'm curious to check those out, but I feel like the heart and the soul and the that classic, like that's a goofy movie, like that weird stuff, that's probably not going to be in it. There's probably other things that they're trying, because you can't just do the same stuff over and over again. But these movies, the first two especially, it's like, oh yeah, that's, you can tell that it's just like fake and fun. It's like a Halloween store.
All the blood looks like paint and not all the
Yes.
blood is red. Like there's sometimes like green blood and blue blood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love, there was a detail I read about that where they were trying to get around censors with changing the blood color, which is, if I was somebody that was like working in like the censor office or whatever, or the ratings board, and they're like, oh, it's okay because the blood is like black in this shot, I'd be like, it's still like a headless body with like fluid
Yeah.
shooting out. Like, what are you guys doing? No,
Like,
it's green. When you hit him with the axe, it's green. So it's only
It
rated R
still
now,
looks
right?
insane.
Yeah,
It still looks insane.
yeah. But they're like, we won't get an X rating then, right? And it's like, no, it's going to be unrated or rated X, or like it's not going to get rated R. Like, what do you guys? They're trying to pull a fast one. Like, we're being cute about it. It's fine. It's like, no, come on, guys. But
yeah.
also, who wants that job too? Who wants to be like, I'm the ratings guy who has to like kill all the fun now? Like, who wants to grow up and do that?
Are both movies unrated?
I believe they're both X rated. I think the first one was
Oh,
X rated, and then I think there's like an R rated cut of the second one, but it's just unrated released. I think once
I
it gets an
see.
X rating, they're like, people just don't want to print the movie because no one's going to show it. So if it's unrated, they can print more of them. I think that's how that goes.
Oh.
Because it was
Yeah.
definitely X-rated. Because the first one, it's like way like there's just blood. They don't do the fun blood thing, and then there's the content is just not as fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I it was
Like it
like
goes darker places in the first one. So
the first one was like really controversial.
yeah, yeah.
And had like there was some sort of legal action in the UK, I think, dude, with it because it was so gory.
Hmm.
Um so yeah, it is kind of like it is an aspect of camp things not is things not being things in quotations. It's like, oh, it's not blood, it's
Hmm.
monster blood, so it's
Yeah,
green.
yeah, and nobody suffered. It's a monster, so you can show a bunch of it. You can have like fire hoses of it shooting out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like as like a lot of we've talked about like the effects not being very polished and just like the very retrograde nature of the film makes it even more camp nowadays since like post elevated horror uh like with the name elevated horror there's like this implication that horror films that aren't under that umbrella are worse horror or
Hmm.
stupid horror maybe, but the way that people have enjoyed this film and this series is kind of a counter argument to that. Like there's so much like scholarly work on this film and like as we talked about in regards to the camera and how this horror comedy operates differently from most other horror comedies. Like it kind of shows that there's not one specific way to make smart horror, but that also horror doesn't have to be smart to be good and to be like worthy of discussion and study.
Yeah, absolutely. I really hope that, because I don't think it's just that people are making stupid weird horror stuff, and stupid I say lovingly, like,
Yeah.
not there is non elevated horror coming out these days, but it is still like, I think the things that, I mean, there's been a bit of a exhaustion, I think, but there
Yeah.
is it is still what is seen as profitable, and what is getting talked about, of it's like, horror films that it's a metaphor, and it has some sort of, it's being marketed that it's saying something, or like exploring interesting themes, when it's like horror's always explored interesting themes. It's always been about complex issues, but I mean, I feel like Ari Aster films are probably what is he's I think who I most associated with this like elevated horror. But I mean, Alex Garland with Man or Men, I think also was
Yeah.
guilty of that, and um,
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like the trends now, and maybe those will change. Maybe we'll get back to dumb horror again. or just a different style. Instead of it being like the horror is family grief, it can be the horror is just, I mean, because there was the big zombie revival that happened in the mid 2000s that kind of went on forever. It felt like just
Yeah.
everything was a zombie movie.
Well, and then
And
those also had the aspect of like it was all actiony too.
yes, yeah,
And
it
it's
was all
like,
about like the guns and the cars and the zombies. It was like Fast and the Furious almost.
yeah.
And then it became more about like family trauma and issues with that, or cults, or like
Yeah.
My Boyfriend Sucks with Midsummer, just stuff like that, which is relatable and like, but then they put like a horror twist on it. So
Yeah. Actually, you know who probably is a good contemporary example? Panos Cosmatos.
Oh, that's Mandy, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
Mandy.
yeah.
And
I still haven't seen Mandy, but it looks really good.
Mandy,
And it doesn't look like it's about anything.
no,
Yeah, yeah,
Mandy's a fairy tale. Like Mandy is a dark, weird fairy tale.
kind of like Evil
Um,
Dead too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen two of his stuff now. I haven't seen his first film. Um, but I've seen Mandy and I've seen his episode of the Guillermo del Toro anthology series. It's like, which is basically like, short films, hour-long films. And that it's like he coasts on vibes. Uh, um, but I'm really excited because there was that buzz a while ago of Oscar Isaac and Kristen Stewart being cast in a vampire movie, and
Yeah.
that's Panos Cosmatos is the director of that, and
Oh,
so
that's exciting.
yeah, I was like, everyone was like, oh my god, that's so cool, they're gonna be in a vampire movie, and I was like, y'all, this is gonna be weird. If it, hopefully, if he, I mean, I don't think, but he doesn't seem, considering the fact that, he had a mini Netflix movie, and his artistic vision was absolutely as strong as ever. I don't think that there won't be sacrifices made, even if he's, bigger budget and bigger release, which is cool. More horror directors should just be doing what they think is fun.
Exactly.
More horror should run on vibes
Yeah.
and not be scared to be stupid.
Yeah.
That's like the big lesson of Evil Dead 2.
Yeah.
Once in my fridge cellar. Someone with a fresh soul. Out of the house! There's something down there! It's a trick! I know it! Move it! Open those chains up!
Come to sweet Henrietta.
Do either of you have any last thoughts? Any closing things you want to say? I feel like we're
kind of based on what Fabiola just said about movies not being afraid to be dumb and take the risks. I think they kind of learned their lessons with Evil Dead 1 when they made that, because I think they were trying to make something that was infamous and freaky and cool and like too edgy, and I think maybe they went a little far with it, and then they kind of got a chance to remake it in a way just because they got money to do it, and the movie they did after Evil Dead was a flop, so they're like back to Evil Dead to like make a good movie. So they actually made something that, I mean, it wasn't like they were trying to be more mainstream and like get more people to watch it. They were just trying to like kind of polish up the vision, is what it felt like, and kind of reimagine it a little more with how they actually wanted to make a movie, which was more true to Sam Raimi as a person. He wanted to make something that was like, I'm a goofy kid that likes the Three Stooges. I'm going to make my goofy Three Stooges movie now with my friends, and it's going to be bloody and stupid, and we're just going to do all the stuff that we've been what ifing about for the last 5 years. So yeah, you can make your dumb movie. You might have to make a few crappy movies, but you'll make your dumb movie eventually, and
Yeah.
you'll be happy with it. So keep trying. I guess that's the lesson you get from Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2.
Yeah. Yeah,
Keep trying.
Evil Dead I might like more just because I was so impressed by the special effects and stuff. But the Evil Dead also has, I mean, it's infamous, this weird, I think it's dubbed the tree rape scene.
Yes.
It's
Also in one of the remakes, I think.
oh, they
Oh, they
redid it
kept
in the
that?
remake.
They've done that again.
You don't
It,
have to do that again, guys. What are you doing?
I mean, and it's definitely
I
like,
respect it for doing it again.
yeah, I mean, but I think that it is a good, it's like, it feels very out of place. And if you like listen to interviews, it's like they were trying to do something shocking. And it's ends up like, while I respect the audacity, it's also like when it's tonally a little out of place from the rest of the movie because the rest of the movie isn't sexualized at all. So um I can see them, being like, okay, with Evil Dead 2, it's like, okay, let's like, trying to be super shocking might not always, that can get attention, but what do we want to do? What's the story that we want to tell that is just like the most fun to us, instead of like, I guess, um assuming what audiences might want or might get a reaction out of audiences. I can interpret that.
Yeah, like it's definitely evil. And the first movie is more about being evil. So, and it's called Evil Dead. So, yeah, all right, you can like justify it that way if they're gonna say it's evil, we're being evil. But I don't know. I guess it depends on the filmmakers and the actors, and if they're gonna make something, if they want to shoot scenes, like, all right, you guys are making your movie. So, but I feel like I know I read somewhere, I don't remember where, that Sam Raimi kind of not kind of, he regrets having that in the first movie just because that's what everyone remembers about it and talks about, like, oh, Evil Dead, like, that one part, and that can detract from the rest of the movie too. So if I'm sure if he could
Yeah,
go back and edit the movie back in 1980 or 1981 and like just like you would, if you did edit that out, you wouldn't even notice it.
yeah,
So the fact that it's
yeah,
like, because later in that movie, to go back all the way to the beginning of Evil Dead 1, or not the beginning, but towards the end, Scotty gets attacked by the Force too.
yeah,
He just leaves the cabin, comes back, he's all bloody and he has like a broken arm and he's all messed up. Like they could have easily just edited it to be the same for Cheryl. So the fact that they didn't, it's like, okay, they're trying to like be sleazy and do, and I spit on your grave, last house on the left kind of thing, because that's what all the drive-in movies were showing and that's what people expected. And that's what maybe they thought, oh, the audience will like this because it's a bunch of gross teenage boys watching these stupid movies anyways. But yeah, I know that Sam Raimi, I read that he was like, I don't like that I put that in there, I should change
yeah,
it. So
yeah.
that's probably why they kind of allude to that in Evil Dead 2 with
Yeah,
when Bobby Joe gets attacked by the Force, but it just drags her around and slams her into a tree because it's a monster and it
Yeah.
just wants to kill people.
yeah, yeah. It was interesting. I don't know where the clip was originally from, but I saw it in the Dead Meat video of, yeah, it was Sam Raimi basically being like, he regrets it because he was like, I don't want to offend, I just want to have fun. And I think that, I mean, if his
It's
ethos
very
is,
clear in Evil Dead 2.
yeah,
Yes.
he's like, I just want to have fun, I want to have a good time. It's like that that that's the movie.
Saffron, I have a question for you.
Yes.
What was your iconic shot for the movie Evil Dead 2? What's the thing that makes you go, oh, Evil Dead 2? We talked about that earlier, but let's get back to that
Oh,
because you didn't share yours, did you?
yes. Well, I think it's two. I think it's the hand giving the middle finger, the chopped off hand giving the
Okay.
middle finger. Um, because it's, I don't know. I love that little guy. The hand was my favorite character of the movie. Um, um, And I also think the final sequence of, you know, Ash just screaming while everyone is like, "Hail our hero!"
Oh yeah.
is really funny and really fun too, because it almost felt like a little like, you know, the knights as these almost could be these audience stand-ins of being like, this guy's so cool, and him being like, get me out of here, I think
Hmm.
is just very fun and camp of being like, we're enjoying you and we don't care if you're suffering, we're having a good time and we're happy you're here.
Nice. Fabiola, you haven't seen the first one, right?
I haven't yet, but
Do
now
you think you're
I
going
think I
to? Do
have
you think you
to.
want to? Or
Yeah.
yeah.
It
I want to watch the full original trilogy.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to watch I'm like, I don't know, just I some evening when I wanted something fun and chill, I'll probably pop on Army of Darkness, because
Yeah, Army of Darkness, like pacing wise, it doesn't feel as long as it is. Like you'll
mm.
watch it and you'll be like, oh, it's done. I watched it. Like it'll just fly right by. Whereas with Evil Dead 1, it's a little bit of a slog. It feels like it's a little long.
The
It's not
beginning
as long as
is
Evil Dead 2, but
off. Yeah, the begin it
yeah,
takes some time to get into it. But the thing I think with
yeah.
the first The Evil Dead is, I have built up a pretty good like tolerance and even like appreciation for gore in movies.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, this makes me feel sick to my stomach.
It gets pretty
Um
gross at the end.
it gets gross. It's and so I was like massive respect. When a
Yeah.
film makes me feel gross, I'm like, I mean, gross in from like the effects and the design. If it feels gross politically or, you know, morally, I'm like,
Yeah.
why? What?
No, this is just nasty. Just like ugh.
Yeah, yeah.
Like yeah.
The
I don't want to
tagline's very fitting.
yeah, yeah. But so if you're I definitely recommend 3 if you just have like a Sunday afternoon to kill and you're like, I've got like 3 hours, I'm not doing anything. If you throw that on, like you'll enjoy it, it'll fly by. It's pretty entertaining. It's the comedy is a little more like they're trying out jokes a little bit more than in 2.
Hmm.
So there's that. A couple more one-liners here and there, but it's definitely and it's a continuation of the story. It's not like a big passage of time between the 2 stories. And there are 2 different endings too. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah, I prefer. I think it's a reshoot because the original ending I think was like a bummer and like let's redo it and it looks a little better
Mm.
if I'm remembering correctly. I watched both endings recently and I was like, I do prefer the happy ending for sure.
I feel like knowing my taste, I may prefer the downer ending.
It is a downer. I mean, it's pretty stupid. It's a stupid, silly like downer. You're like, oh, of course, it's a big dumb joke at the end, and it's very abrupt. It just kind of, oh, the movie's over. And you're like, okay,
Well, uh, thank you so much again, Dominic, for being on this episode,
thank you
coming
for
and
having
talking to
me.
me.
I appreciate being on the show.
Is
Uh,
there anything you want to shout out? Anything you want to, links you want to share? Obviously, Grand
how
Illusion
many am I allowed to
Cinema.
share? How many am I allowed?
I mean, I don't
However
know.
many.
We I don't think there's a character limit on our episode
Okay, I'm
descriptions.
gonna go
So.
crazy. I'm gonna plug like everything on the planet. Hold on.
Oh,
So I'm in a band.
cool! Yeah.
I just joined a band and they're doing an album release show. I didn't play on this album. They recorded it and then I joined right afterwards. And they're called Three Fingers and the album is called Jam Packed and it's coming out in September of 2024. Sorry to date this show.
Yes, this
Uh
episode will be coming out late September. So,
oh, probably around the time that
yeah.
this album release is happening. So there's that. And then I have a personal movie Instagram because I show movies in my backyard called Wallingford Outdoor Movies. Wallingford Outdoor Movies. Look it up. It's private though. So if you try to like find me on there and I don't know you, I'll just like delete you and block you. But if I do know you and you're not following me on there, you should because I watch stuff in the summertime in my backyard and it's a good time. And also the Grand Illusion, because they need everyone's support. It's a volunteer-run theater, and they need members. If you want to be a member and donate and watch movies for cheap and rent the theater and do all those fun things, you just look up grandillusioncinema.org. And yeah, you can check out all the screenings on there. We got a lot of fun programming, a lot of fun stuff coming up this fall. They always do a really fun Halloween month-long All Monsters Attack October series that
Yeah.
they show a lot of movies, and they get a lot of film too. So check that out. Those are all my plugs. Thank you for listening to all my plugs.
Yeah. And yeah, check out that. Those will be in our episode description. I'll get those links. And I don't know, what's our last word?
Groovy.
Yes, groovy. I agree.
Oh yeah.
Groovy indeed. Yes.
Groovy.
I have been your co-host, Saffron Hefta-Gaub. You can follow me online everywhere at Gaub Hefta.
And I've been your other co-host, Fabiola. You can find me on Instagram at Fabi0LAHH and on Twitter at Fabiola_Liano.
Our theme song that you're bobbing your head to right now is by Harrison Lurie.
Give us a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple.
Thank you to our patrons, Nicole Veneto, Jose Liano, and Pericles Gaspari. Please check our episode description for additional links and citations.
Thank you so much.